the afternoon of June 4th in California. Another week in venture capital, another week in tech. Keith, rather boring, uneventful week in the world, isn't it?
What a week. I mean, unbelievable week. I mean, the real world is dominating the venture world. Normally when I do one of these venture reports, mostly the content is about either startups, advice to startups, venture capital, and the trials and tribulations of venture capital. This week, the venture capitalists are all talking about the real world, and there's really two themes. The first theme is, should Donald Trump be censored or have his post modified or tagged in some way on social media, or disappeared altogether as it has been on Snap? And the second theme is all about racial inequality. Thank goodness, it's been a long time coming, driven of course by the events around the world, and really around the world, really impressive events where millions of people have been out campaigning for racial equality. So that dominates, those two things dominate the week. And guess what? No one agrees about anything.
And the really good news is we don't have to talk about crypto this week, right?
We do not have to talk about crypto. So worth saying, Bitcoin did reach $10,000 again at one point during the week. It's down.
No more crypto. That's the end of that, certainly for this week. So I don't know if it was this week or last week, but I tweeted something like, everyone now has to choose one of Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg. It's Twitter versus Facebook. And I think you and I are on quite different camps here, not necessarily unusually. We're often in disagreement, friendly disagreement. But I'm still amazed that you're sympathetic to Zuckerberg's unwillingness to have any kind of curation of the Facebook platform. What's your position here, Keith?
My position really starts from outside of both Facebook and Twitter. It starts with the often misquoted Voltaire, who actually didn't say what I'm about to say, but is attributed to saying it. And that is, I disagree profoundly with everything you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. It's actually really about Donald Trump. And I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but I think it is a grave mistake for those who oppose Trump to seek to intervene in his publishing abilities on platforms that, at least on the face of it, claim to be open, albeit run by private companies. The starting point for both platforms is, we are not a publisher, we're a platform, you are the publisher, and our job is to deliver your message to other users on the platform. That's a kind of a starting point for a platform that I approve of. And I think it undermines those platforms if they unless someone's breaking the law. I think that's clearly everyone's subject to the law. But beyond that, I think it's wrong to modify. And when you look at Mark Zuckerberg, Kara Swisher did a fantastic job of transcoding or transcribing Zuckerberg's meeting with the employees of Facebook yesterday, where he went into great detail when he believes Facebook would be right to intervene. And some of those beliefs people disagree with strongly. For example, he made the point that a nation state has a monopoly of violence, and therefore a nation state threatening to use force would be allowed on Facebook unmodified, because that is something the state is legally allowed to do.
But in fairness to what Jack Dorsey has done on Twitter, he's not shutting up Trump. He is not in any way stopping him express himself. He's simply with the caveat on the tweet that he's saying to people, actually, there's another version of what Trump is claiming, and if you click here, you'll learn about it. So he's still allowing Trump to express himself. and say whatever he wants.
You know, I think Jack is in a difficult position and he's trying to do the right thing. I've got, I don't know what I would do in his position, so I don't want to claim superiority in any way. But I do think he is doing two things. In some cases, he's modifying the tweet to indicate that it's of suspicious factual value. And in other cases, he's hiding the tweet because it represents a call for violence. And, you know, it's pretty hard for me to not use the word censor. It's not, obviously, it's not government censorship. And by the way, a publication would be completely entitled to make those decisions. Like the New York Times this week published the statement of the government representative about the use of the troops on the streets. That's a choice the New York Times can make because it's a publication. It can decide to or not to do something. But a platform is it's a new thing. It isn't a publication. Its very existence is for, you know, us, the people, to post stuff, all people. And so I think there's a much higher standard for modifying things.
But I don't think that's true. I mean, Facebook is, I don't know what the numbers are, but some astonishing 70, 80% of people now get all their news from Facebook. So they essentially, whether or not it really is like the New York Times, they treat it as if it's the New York Times. And when you see the numbers, and Kara's been very good on this, when you see the numbers that, whatever it is, 60, 70% of people who believe that America is in flames and anarchy and that there are people literally climbing the gates of the White House to murder Trump, which are not true, they're getting that information on Facebook. So Facebook is increasingly becoming the way in which not truth, but lies are distributed.
Think of it this way, Andrew. If we built, and I'm only slightly joking here in the words I'm going to use, if we built a great big wall and gave everybody a piece of chalk and said, go and write on the wall. And then after 5 years, some guy came along who built the wall and started rubbing out the stuff he didn't approve of or agree with, we'd all recognize that that wasn't part of the game. And Facebook doesn't have an editor. It doesn't have an editorial board. It is not a publication. It is a conveyor of many publications, including the New York Times. Anyone can publish to it, and anyone can read what's published. And by the way, everyone can do searches and create filters and block people. So as adults, Facebook has given us the tools to do whatever we want, including blocking Donald Trump personally if we want to do that. But it shouldn't.
So, but what does that tell us then about Facebook if, as Kara and many other people are suggesting, it's become the most effective platform, not for truth or information, but for disinformation, whether it's the lies of propagandists or the exaggeration of one kind of polemicist or another?
Well, that goes back to your, I think it was your first book.
Cult of the Amateur, yeah.
The Cult of the Amateur, which, by the way, is a great book for anyone who hasn't read it, and we'll put a link to it. Makes the case that the abundance of content makes it extremely difficult to distinguish between people who know what they're talking about and people who don't.
Like you and I.
Like you and I. Here we are, two amateurs pontificating. And that's correct, by the way. You're quite right. The technology of publishing has become so ubiquitous that the only way to disambiguate is through features like following and filtering and blocking, which is work. I do think there should be more features.
And it's human work. Whatever the Facebook people tell us, this can't be done with an algorithm.
I think the most easy way to do it is to give people the tools. So let's say every Trump post, not just Trump, every post had a reply button that said fact check. And I could go and fact check Trump and post what I found. you know, or better still, somebody with more expertise than me could go and do that. That would solve 99% of the problem right there.
I think I'm a little bit more sympathetic to you, Keith. This week you've got in a number of, I wouldn't say fights, but heated conversations on Twitter about this New York Times decision to put the Senator Cotton's piece about the need essentially for martial law in America in their op-ed. A lot of people have been saying, including people who work for the New York Times, that this is racist and was a fundamental error. You, I think, argue that it's, again, a manifestation of free speech and that the New York Times should indeed be publishing stuff on its op-ed page that it doesn't agree with. I tend to actually sympathize with you here. Why has this been, do you think, such a traumatic case, particularly from the point of view of left liberals? Is it because people just get so hot and bothered about the New York Times? They always seem to be angry about it for one reason or another.
Well, I think the starting point for understanding it is just recognizing that the emotion behind those who said they shouldn't publish it is a valid emotion. Trump is an out of control liar who will, if he gets away with it, use military force against the people. And so, quite rightly, everybody is aghast at that and against it. Not everyone's against it, but you know, most of the people who read the New York Times would be against it. I am also against it. So when the New York Times publishes Cotton and people read it, the emotion gets the better of them. Instead of saying, well, thank God the New York Times is showing us what this person thinks and how terrible is it what they think, which is what an op-ed is for, by the way, to highlight another person's opinion. That's the very nature of an op-ed. And it is not required in an op-ed that you agree with the opinion. That's the whole point of it. And the New York Times has a perfectly good editorial page where it can reply to the op-ed and say what it thinks. That right to reply is a long-standing tradition in both print and television and radio, going and was fought for at the time. So I think what happens is the anger at the government and Trump in particular spills over into asking the Times not to be the Times anymore, but to become an organ of the opposition to Trump. Well, it kind of is an organ of the opposition to Trump, but it has op-eds and it has right to reply. I think people are just getting confused.
Yeah, and I tend to think that the op-ed in itself, the fact that a senator in the United States would be willing to unambiguously call for martial law is in itself news. But anyway, let's move on from media. The conversation in America is increasingly about what one New Republic writer described as the end of a social contract in America, or the need to rebuild the social contract. And of course, that's really important from the point of view of venture capitalists. Do you think that the social contract in America is essentially now broken?
I don't know if you saw it, Andrew, but Trevor Noah from The Daily Show did about a 20-minute live talk, I think it was on Twitter this week, where he was responding to the looting and the violence that was going on around the periphery of what were mainly peaceful marches. And he said he wasn't prepared to criticize even the looters because the looters grew up in a society where they were told there was a contract, that we're all part of the same thing. And the killing of George Floyd to them was effectively tearing up the contract. And by tearing up the contract, you make it legitimate in response to not play by the rules. And when people are angry, he wasn't justifying looting, by the way, he was just explaining context. When people are angry, they will do things they wouldn't normally do. And so the social contract, as if you go back to Durkheim and Weber, which I'm sure you've read, is the glue of society. And if the glue becomes unstuck, bad things happen. So yes, it has come unstuck, and the venture world is right in the middle of it. This week, Andreessen Horowitz, which by the way has billions of dollars under management, announced a 2.2 million fund using donations from the partners. So not a real fund raised from limited partners, but a partner donated fund, and inviting donations from others to invest in minority founders. Well, it's great they did that. It's small and arguably very late. Then SoftBank is in a big mess. Announced a $100 million fund to also invest in minority founders. It's not clear what the rules of that fund are. And I know, looking at Crunchbase, which has an article this week in the newsletter talking about practical steps for founders to take who come from minorities, that there is a big kind of societal pressured reaction that is forcing people to contemplate racial inequality and to do something about it. And obviously that's all to the good. It needs to be a lot more.
Well, you and I know a lot of venture capitalists. Actually, you know probably a lot more than I do, but most of the ones I know, John Borthwick, Albert Wenger, David Hornick, they all seem to have strong social consciences. Surely we're going to get more than just a 2 billion giveaway from Andreessen Horowitz when they have billions of dollars under management. Where do you see the real initiative coming from within venture to begin to address this broken social contract? Is it committing to higher taxes, public works, reconstruction? Is it setting up serious funds committed to minority owners?
I think it has to go beyond that. I mean, venture capital is, if you think of the money system as being a pyramid, venture capital is the tiny little bit at the top that sticks out. But underlying venture capital is vast sources of wealth sitting in pension funds and endowments. And underneath the pension funds and endowments is even larger sources of wealth sitting in private hands. It feels to me as if even if 100% of venture capital was invested in underrepresented founders, it would barely move the needle. It's not that it shouldn't happen, but it really won't be enough. This is a structural racism. It really starts with where you're born and what school you go to and how many siblings you've got and whether your parents had good experiences growing up or bad ones. So what do they pass on to you? If society treats you like an animal, it's going to be very hard for you to act in a manner that will allow you to be successful. So there's a cycle of reinforced racism through structural, societal things. In America, by the way, I was doing homework with my 13-year-old last week about social mobility in America. If you are born in the bottom 10% of America, the chances of you jumping to the top are 1%. 1%. If you go to college, it jumps to about 40%. But hardly any of that group go to college.
But the old critique of Silicon Valley, which is perhaps even truer now than it's ever been, is that it doesn't invest in startups that address any of these issues. You know, Peter Thiel famously said, we wanted flying cars and all we got was 140 characters. Not everyone wanted flying cars. Some people wanted a rebuilt social contract. Some people wanted to address these bigger issues. So Silicon Valley could do a lot more. It's one thing to invest in minority owners. Perhaps the biggest challenge and opportunity is figuring out tech startups that address the big issues about this profound and corrosive inequality that's destroying the social contract, causing riots, undermining trust, and basically making living in America pretty miserable for most people.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Andrew, I grew up in England in a council estate, which for Americans is a project. Um, my father was a Catholic, so we were a big family, 7 children. I was the oldest. Um, I'm the only one that went to college. My next brother down cleaned windows for people. The next brother down after that left school at 15 and became a taxi driver. When he was 18, I bought him a computer, a Commodore, I think it was. He taught himself Turbo Basic and then Turbo Pascal and then C++ and went on to be a chief technology officer. The talent of ordinary people is there. The opportunity really isn't. Mostly, we say it is, but it really isn't, because the old life chances of grabbing hold, even when there are opportunities, the chances you will grab them based on your life experience are very poor. The project I'm most excited about to address this is the Universal Basic Income Project.
Mm.
Was that if we can make it work, and one of the things that happened this week in Spain, where they announced they're giving €1,000 a month to families. And in Germany, they're giving €300 a month to children of families. I think if we could get $2,000 a month in the hands of every family, of every individual, actually, not just every family, education becomes a lot easier, living becomes a lot easier, and seeing the opportunities in order to take them becomes a lot more likely. But that's a big idea. It will take not that much money for that project to become real, probably between 20 and $50 million, all told, over its building phase. I'm certainly seeking capital for that. And I think projects like that.
But your thing is a crypto project, right?
Actually, since we last talked about it, the team has evolved quite a bit because it's at the planning stage. We've now decided to make it an open wallet that any merchant can put spendable money into. So Safeway could put $50 a month into everyone's wallet and hope that they'll go and spend 200. As could any other merchant. So we're going to create a wallet that contains spendable money from any merchant anywhere in the world that we'll top up with a basic income token, which, yes, would be crypto.
I knew you'd get crypto in. You'd figure out, even in a week like this, Keith, you figured out a way to squeeze crypto in at the end.
Crypto is either nothing or it's everything. We don't know yet, but we should keep it on our radar because it's probably going to be everything.